Something I've always loved about BTS's work, especially their music videos, is the way they so perfectly and effortlessly manage to embody very specific aesthetics. For example, in Blood, Sweat, and Tears, everything from their outfits to the sets evoke a sense of dangerous elegance. In their earlier songs like No More Dream or No, their music videos convey the idea of flashy bad boy swagger. But BTS has always been more than just a look or a vibe, and so too these aesthetics were more than just points of visual interest. Instead, these aesthetics conveyed a great deal about the message and theme each song or overall era was concerned with. Blood, Sweat, and Tears wasn't just about elegance, but rather that elegance perfectly described the themes of the song and of the Wings era as a whole, which was all about temptation and struggle. BTS's early songs weren't just full of eye-catching charisma, but the entire school era's look and vibe existed to convey a sense of rebellion and necessary defiance. I could talk endlessly about aesthetics in BTS's work, but there's one aesthetic specifically I've thought about a lot. It actually came to mind looking at RM's first concept photos for his solo album Right Place, Wrong Person. Each photo conveys a sense of displacement, often located in eerie, empty spaces, such as what appears to be an abandoned swimming pool, rooms full of covered furniture, and fluorescent lit compartments. Right away, all of this put me in mind of the concept of liminal space, a very popular internet aesthetic. Liminal space is often categorized by the strangely creepy and oddly appealing allure of abandoned places, or places that hold a sort of eerie nostalgia due to their feeling of being apart from the rest of the world. While I was fascinated by how the concept photos matched this aesthetic, I was hit with the realization that there are actually quite a few BTS music videos that fit this vibe. But more than just showcasing an aesthetic, I believe these videos actually get to the core of what liminal space means and what it points to, which is the more complex topic of liminality. So, in this video, I'm planning to explore this topic as it appears in BTS's canon. I'm going to discuss the music videos that make use of liminal imagery, and why I think these are more than just aesthetic choices, but actually point to whole themes. And later, I'm going to dive into what I think we can learn from these themes in our own lives. So, I hope you'll join me today as we explore the fascinating well that is BTS's relationship with the topic of liminal space. What is liminal space? Before we dive into liminal space in BTS's music videos, I want to more fully explore what liminal space is as an aesthetic and what liminality itself means. However, before we do, a little disclaimer. The idea of liminality is a concept in anthropology and psychology, neither of which I'm an expert on, so I won't be able to explain all the ins and outs of what it means. However, I'm hoping to at least give a good overview to the best of my ability because I think it will make the themes of the music videos even more meaningful. In broad terms, liminality refers to the strange and disorienting state of being in which someone finds themselves in between two things, usually transitioning from one thing to another. In fact, the word liminality even comes from the Latin word for threshold. That is an accurate description, as liminality often occurs when you're in the middle of a transformative experience. That is, when you're no longer how you were before the experience, but you've not yet become how you're going to be when the experience is over. Think, for instance, of important rites of passage like age-based coming-of-age milestones, or a school graduation. Think also of moving from one place to another or starting a new job. As these examples prove, experiencing a moment of liminality can often require a rearranging of your perceptions of time, the world around you, and even yourself. Liminality can even be experienced on a broader societal level, in which traditions, social hierarchies, or even the established ideas about what the future will look like are all called into question. Societal upheavals like war or revolutions can be seen as liminal experiences, and even something we all know and experienced, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, qualifies. These are experiences in which we are stuck in between what once was and what comes next, often without knowing what that will be. On both the smaller personal level and the larger societal level, Liminality is uncomfortable because it forces people to reconsider everything they know or rely on. These can almost be described as being liminal states. While some of the listed examples of liminal states can be good things and can serve as times of renewal, these experiences can also be ones of deep existential dread and uncertainty, which helps us understand why the concept of liminal space is so unsettling. Generally, liminal spaces are often temporary spaces or spaces that deal with literal states of transition. They are not places that encourage permanence and are usually only used for a short period of time or to move from one place to another. Think airports or hotels, or even something as basic as a hallway. However, the idea of liminal space can be found even in things like mythology, folklore, or religion, such as in stories of in-between places like purgatory, or in folk stories about crossroads. As such, the concept of liminal space is absolutely nothing new. Even most analysis of liminality has been around for over 100 years. But the aesthetic concept of liminal space is a more modern approach, thanks in large part to modern urban life and the strange sense of anonymity and displacement people can feel in these locales. Much of the popularity of this aesthetic can also be traced back to the internet's fascination with abandoned places, another common feature of modern life. In the aesthetic sense, liminal space is often both fascinating and freaky, both familiar and foreign. This is especially true when observing these spaces outside of their usual contexts, like abandoned malls, for instance, which look unsettling when they're devoid of people and their usually busy storefronts are starting to decay, or even something as simple as an empty hallway. These things may have a certain sense of familiarity to us, and maybe even some of these concepts evoke nostalgia, but seeing them separated from the context we usually associate with them adds in an extra layer of discomfort. Something else that makes liminal spaces seem extra unsettling is the fact that these in-between places tend to be the perfect place for scary stories to be set. A great example of this is the classic science fiction series The Twilight Zone, which not only leaned heavily into feelings of liminality and displacement, but the title of the show is actually a reference to a liminal concept, referring to the transition between day and night. Of course, more modern examples can be seen throughout the internet and social media nowadays. In fact, the liminal space aesthetic as an internet phenomenon can ostensibly trace its origins back to the concept of the back rooms. This was a picture of an outdated store during its renovation process, which appeared deeply unsettling thanks to its abandoned nature, its overly yellow color scheme, and its glaring fluorescent lights that seemingly had no end. And of course, the picture was given its own terrifying lure to capitalize on this unsettling feeling. Whether scary like the back rooms, slightly nostalgic and sad like an empty place we know well, or a little uncanny like a long fluorescent hallway or quiet stairwell, liminal space functions primarily because of what's not present. These spaces feel in between and, appropriate to their name, feel like thresholds to something we can't even begin to understand. However, they fascinate us because we almost can't help but fill in what's not being said or shown, which makes them rich breeding grounds for art of all kinds, including BTS and their music videos. Liminal space in BTS's work. When you think about it, I believe liminal space makes a lot of sense as a BTS aesthetic. Not only does liminal space do a terrific job of showcasing various concepts they want to discuss, but liminality is very central to many of their most important themes and inspirations. For instance, some psychologists describe young people in and of themselves as liminal beings, since they are not children, but not yet adults, something which BTS often explores in their work, even when they themselves are no longer teenagers. The idea of liminality is even mentioned in the book Map of the Soul 7, Persona, Shadow, and Ego in the World of BTS by Jungian scholar Murray Stein, in which he discusses how liminality is, quote, an uncomfortable in-between state full of uncertainty. He mentions it requires facing the unknown and discovering new aspects of our personality, and liminality is, unsurprisingly, something Carl Jung discussed a great deal. In fact, Jungian psychology views self-realization and the discovery of the self as something that happens within a state of liminal space and time. I can't help but wonder if that's why the rap line's music videos focusing on persona, shadow, and ego respectively have decidedly liminal space elements, such as the empty classroom of RM's intrapersona or especially the eerie, empty hallway of Suga's interlude Shadow. Now, because an overwhelming majority of the music videos I'm going to discuss in this video were directed by longtime BTS collaborator Lumpins, it may be tempting to assume that this aesthetic is just something favored by the director. However, I feel the surrealist, strange, and slightly in-between feeling of each of these videos was intentionally chosen to convey a theme rather than simply a style preference, and is present even in videos directed by others. Beyond that, the way these liminal spaces are presented are not the same from video to video or era to era. Depending on how you choose to look at liminal space as an aesthetic, there are actually a number of videos that fit the theme, and I think it can be argued that BTS may have actually been doing liminal space before it was cool. For instance, I think it could be argued that No was a sort of Backrooms-esque dystopia a good 6 years before the Backrooms was ever even a thing. Although perhaps more indicative of an authoritarian sci-fi story with its Matrix-like pills and its whitewashed walls, the desperation and inescapable nature of the classroom depicted in No's video and portrayed in its lyrics could practically sync up with a modern-day liminal space nightmare. Its feelings of drudgery and loss of identity, for example, make it feel like the school-aged version of a workplace dystopia. However, I believe the first overt instances of not only liminal space, but liminality in BTS's work can be found, rather appropriately, in The Most Beautiful Moment in Life, also known as the HYYH era. Throughout this era, it's common to see BTS's videos set in odd places that seem disconnected from normal locales and removed from normal life. This is especially true of the videos for Run and I Need You. These videos are mostly shot in very mute colors and in dark locations that are deliberately lit with the sickly fluorescent light of many liminal spaces. Beyond that, although BTS are not the only people inhabiting these spaces, the people in the world with them are portrayed as apathetic or even downright hostile towards them, further adding to that sense of dismay and existential dread. Throughout both videos, the only people they truly have are one another, and the only times they ever seem truly happy are in each other's company. Of course, even this happiness does not last, something which is a big recurring theme of this era of BTS's music. In general, the videos of the BTS universe concept, or the BU, play with this theme a great deal. This makes sense given the fact that the titular Most Beautiful Moment in Life refers to youth, the most common period of liminality that most people experience. I also find it interesting that existing in a liminal sense is something that can be described of any group of people that chooses to live outside of society's normal expectations, a lot of which is portrayed in the punkish, societally subversive behavior of BTS's characters in the BU. More than just the look of these videos, therefore, it's the substance of what they portray that sends a very clear liminal message. This notion flows naturally into BTS's next era, the Wings era. Continuing both the themes of HYYH and the BU itself, Wings and its follow-up album You Never Walk Alone are deeply liminal in themes, messages, and visuals. Wings in particular takes many of HYYH's concepts such as youth, its triumphs, and its struggles, and elaborates on them even further, adding commentary on the temptations of youth as well as its dangers. Many of these themes were first introduced in a series of short films teasing the album's 7 solo tracks. In turn, they are also present in the novel upon which much of Wings is based, Damien by Hermann Hesse. Interestingly enough, not only are the Wings short films great examples of liminal space and liminality in BTS's work, but the novel itself, which follows the formative years of a boy named Emile Sinclair, could be seen as deeply liminal too. Throughout the works of the Wings era, various quotes from the novel appear, including ones about Emile's belief that the world is split into 2 separate realms. The first realm is concerned with things that are traditionally seen as good and moral, while the second realm is the very real realm that exists alongside the first, which includes the terrible things that happen in reality. For much of the novel, Emile experiences what it's like to be caught in between these worlds, feeling like he doesn't belong in either, and trying to find his own path among the confusion these 2 realms represent. Of course, all of these themes get turned up to the extreme in the music video for Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the album's title track. Blood, Sweat, and Tears is one of my favorite BTS music videos, thanks in no small part to how it manages to be simultaneously elegant decadent, and honestly a little scary. The entire video takes place in a beautiful but ultimately purgatory-like museum space, which is disconnected from anything else. Unlike I Need You or Run, this is more than just a hostile or apathetic world that still plays by the rules of the real world. This is an entirely different space in and of itself. Although very different, the Japanese version of the music video achieves the same effect, and, I would argue, manages to be even more liminal. I'm not going to get into the Japanese video much here, because it honestly deserves an entire video dedicated to it. But it embraces the terror of liminality even more than the original Korean version in ways that are actually deeply chilling and richly symbolic. Moving out of the spooky liminality of the Wings era and into the sadder emptiness of liminal space, we of course end up in Spring Day. There are feelings of transition and being displaced throughout both the song and its music video. In fact, in a previous video, I discussed how Spring Day thrives on a sense of Han, which is an element of Korean culture dealing with the mixture of various emotions, including nostalgia, pain, anger, and grief, a combination which feels right at home with the idea of liminal space. In that same video, I also pointed out that much of Spring Day's music video takes place in seemingly normal places. However, these locations also strike me as being very liminal, both in the sense of being transitory spaces like the train, and in terms of being forlorn, abandoned locales, such as the merry-go-round bearing the album's name, or the motel room where many of the video's important scenes take place. The idea of these places being empty and uncanny is even highlighted in the video when we see Jungkook running alone through the train, the Omelas Motel, and the laundromat, all of which have a desperate and uncomfortable feel when there's no one around to populate them. Even before that, the world outside is portrayed as a cold and desolate place devoid of people, further adding to the liminal feel. I also think we see a very clear example of both physical liminal space and mental/emotional liminal space in this iconic scene in which Jin watches the other members ascend a staircase. Staircases are a very good example of liminal space, as you use them to transition between one floor and another, and there always seems to be something strange about lingering in a stairwell for too long. They serve as great metaphors for shifting between two things, and the idea of that within the context of the song is especially poignant. As discussed previously, both the song's lyrics and its music video highlight what it feels like to miss someone who is no longer present in your life, and the feeling of going through life without them. In a sense, it might feel like they've left you behind, as Suga says in his verse when he notes, "Yes, I hate you, you left me," making this visual depiction of the staircase even sadder. Spring Day is massively liminal in its themes, chiefly in how it explores the loss of friendship, the way it incorporates the idea of walking away from your previous life in its references to the story The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, and in its references to the real-life Seoul ferry disaster. All of these things constitute a change in circumstances and a feeling of wandering to try and find equilibrium again. But the song also gives us comfort to know that we are not alone in this struggle, as the name of the album so clearly tells us. Moving out of You Never Walk Alone, liminal space in BTS's work continues almost everywhere we see the BU present, including in Love Yourself era videos like the Love Yourself highlight reels, Euphoria, Epiphany, or Fake Love. I believe these not only perfectly continue the BU's deeply liminal storyline, but actually speak to the structure of the album series. Because the Love Yourself era is meant to depict a journey through love and into self-love, it has a sort of liminal feel as if moving from one destination to another and experiencing growth in between. This is why the liminal vibes, while not as overtly present in the Map of the Soul era, nevertheless feel right at home with its messages. Earlier, I mentioned the liminal hallway of Interlude Shadow, but I also think Black Swan fits the theme as well in both the music video and the art film. Not only do both videos perfectly embody the aesthetic of abandoned places, but the theme of the song likewise describes the in-between state of an artist's creative stagnation. The idea of dying a creative first death also feels liminal, as it sends the artist into an in-between sort of state where they're still alive but feel as if part of them has died. Ironically enough, swans themselves are sometimes considered liminal beings, as they are birds who can fly, swim, or live on the land, making them truly in between, and black swans especially have an interesting liminal status, given they were once thought to be impossible. In the song Black Swan, we see BTS conquer their fear of creative death, but they acknowledge that this frightening place of doubt is always there, making them just as liminal as black swans. Because of this, it's perhaps very fitting that some of their most recent solo work also fits this theme. Although I specifically mentioned RM's solo work as being the thing that inspired me to dive deeper into this concept, he's not the only member whose solo songs have evoked this aesthetic. In fact, depending on how you choose to identify liminal space and its meaning, quite a few members have used these images in their music videos, from Jimin's Like Crazy to Suga's Hegum. Beyond that, some of the members' older solo work also leans very heavily into this theme. Many of Suga's August D songs embrace the vibe of liminal space as he wrestles with his various identities and feelings, and RM not only embraces these feelings in his 2018 mixtape Mono, but sometimes even celebrates them. Many of these songs acknowledge the liminal nature of existing between past and present, or between expectation and reality, and admit this is sad or difficult. But other songs accept the liminal nature of things and of people in a way I believe we can all benefit from. Through their various works, BTS show us that liminality and liminal space can be hard to endure, but that it's okay to work through these uncomfortable feelings in the eternal hope of something better. What we can learn from liminality. As I said earlier in the video, I am certainly no expert on the concepts of liminality or liminal space, but I am definitely both terrified and fascinated by them. While liminal space spooks me, I found it very difficult to stop researching and finding ways to connect this topic back to BTS's work. Some of that is because the videos I get to discuss when talking about this topic are some of BTS's most iconic or among my personal favorites. But some of it is also the fact that liminal space and the concept of liminality more broadly are, in many cases, about the feeling of being displaced, anonymous, or off balance, all of which are things I can deeply relate to. For some of us, that sense of liminality never goes away. Something I talk about a great deal in my analysis of BTS and their message is the feeling of being different or other, something that many people understand. While some people are lucky enough to find their niche or the place that makes them feel accepted, that may not always be so easy for others. Because of that, I think the concept of liminal space can teach us to reflect on the journeys of those around us, as well as our own personal journeys. Although our experiences with liminality are as different as we ourselves are, we have all experienced liminal periods of our life and can empathize with the sense of being displaced. I think part of what makes the idea of liminal space in BTS's work so compelling is the fact that BTS have also experienced these periods of time and have openly discussed them in their work. They have discussed youth and its uncertainty. They've discussed the loss of friendships, moving from place to place, and the struggles they've experienced in their work. They've endured the COVID-19 pandemic right alongside of us and have discussed it unflinchingly. Therefore, so many of the struggles they've felt physically, mentally, and emotionally seem to be perfectly described through this concept. I'd even say their military service counts as a period of liminality, making it all the more meaningful to discuss this topic as the end of said service is finally in sight. As we leave this period of uncertainty, BTS and ARMY now stand at another threshold as we wait to see what comes next for the band and for us as their fans. In an article for Forbes Health, clinical social worker Melissa Cohen describes liminal space as representing both the discomfort of the unknown and the possibility to grow. Uncertainty can be emotionally demanding and mentally exhausting, but it can also be transformative and valuable, providing creativity, strength, and the opportunity to develop a mindset that anything is possible. I believe this theme is central to BTS's work, and I'd love to see it be explored in the future as we all strive to develop that unshakable mindset together. BTS has always embodied the ideas mentioned in the article: creativity, strength, and a mindset of hope for the future, and it's my own hope for the future that this fact never changes. When it comes to liminality, there is one last element that I think we can all learn from when it comes to BTS and ourselves, and that is the idea of liminoid experiences. These are different from liminal states in that we choose to have these experiences rather than find ourselves thrust into them during a period of transition. When it comes to liminoid experiences, I think it can be argued that a BTS concert would count as one such experience, in which we disengage ourselves from our usual lives and experience the displacement of being in an entirely different space and entirely different community. In that sense, at least, I think there will always be a liminality attached to BTS that goes beyond even the themes of their work, and I think that's a very good thing. Now, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about this topic. Are you familiar with the liminal space aesthetic? What are some examples of liminal space in your own life or liminal experiences that BTS helped you through? Are there any other videos, songs, or experiences in BTS's work that remind you of liminal space or liminality? While I certainly didn't get to talk about every example I could think of, I'm sure there are even more examples that didn't occur to me. So as always, I'd love to hear all your thoughts and feelings about this aesthetic and theme. Until next time.